on Plugged In, drowning in plastic. 8 million metric tons of it ending up in our oceans each year. It's not just clogging up our waterways, it's also killing our wildlife. And unless we do something about it, it could end up killing you and our planet. Find out what the U.S. and the rest of the world are doing about it. Welcome to Plugged In. I'm Greta Van Susteren. The world is literally drowning in this stuff, and we are all part of the problem. Around the globe, we humans buy more than 1 million plastic bottles every minute. That's more than 1 billion plastic bottles every day. And despite our best efforts, less than half of it will be salvaged for recycling. Most of it ends up in our oceans. More on the world's growing plastic waste problem from VOA's Kevin Enochs.
8 million metric tons of plastic find their way into the world's oceans every year. In Gabon, the beaches are littered with it. In the Drina River, which flows between Montenegro, Serbia, and Bosnia, it creates islands of floating garbage. In Australia, plastic straws litter the ocean floor offshore from Sydney, Australia. We are slowly drowning in our own waste.
We have thrown so much garbage into the sea, and it has reached coasts where there are not even people, but there is already garbage. It is very sad to see animals that have died, to see nests of birds that are mixed with garbage.
Efforts to pick up all that trash are growing, but with so much going into the world's waterways, small grassroots efforts cannot hope to keep up.
We have so much plastic garbage. We believe that between 100 and 200 tons of plastic garbage is dumped daily, and that is enormous. When we have river flooding or something similar, we can see the result. Tons of garbage floating in the rivers.
In Australia, after a summer of picking straws off the ocean floor, a team of volunteers plucked over 2,000 straws out of Manly Cove. To put that in perspective, Australians use 2.9 billion straws a year. But even when local efforts to pick up all that garbage are making an impact, there's a much bigger problem. In countries that have well-established recycling programs, all that plastic waste has to go somewhere. Until recently, the Chinese were doing a booming business, dealing with an estimated 45% of the world's throwaway plastic. That is until 2018, when Beijing abruptly banned all plastic imports. And a lot of that plastic is ending up in places like Malaysia, Vietnam, and Thailand.
Before the China ban, they just sent to China for recycling, but they do not take this further step to ensure those recyclable are properly recycled. And now, after the China waste ban, they just find another new places to send their recyclable to.
And none of these countries have the recycling infrastructure in place to deal with that trash. So it ends up going back into the environment, or it is being disposed of in ways that are putting local people at risk.
They just dump the non-recyclable plastic or the reject product, and then they burn in the backyard of this factory. So those toxic fumes actually already cause a lot of health problem to our residents.
And these countries are beginning to follow China's lead and cap the amount of plastic waste they're willing to take in.
We are killing ourselves by using too many plastic. We too depend on plastic. Please manage and handle your own trash. Don't dump to our country.
At a recent United Nations conference in Geneva, 180 countries discussed a proposal to force plastic waste exporters to receive permission from destination countries in advance, a system known as prior informed consent. But environmental activists say the ultimate answer has nothing to do with recycling, but with moving away from our throwaway plastic culture. And fast. Kevin Enochs, VOA News.
Tons of garbage are also being dumped on some countries, along with the plastic they agreed to recycle. The world's garbage is also piling up. And where to put all of it has become an urgent issue for the planet. One that created a big stink recently between the Philippines and Canada when Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte recalled his ambassador to Canada and declared war against Canada for shipping tons of waste to the Philippines. Since 2013, a private Canadian company which received the contract to dispose recyclable waste to the Philippines has delivered more than 100 shipping containers of trash marked as recyclable materials. But it turns out a lot of it, some 2,500 tons, was made up of non-recyclable household waste, everything from food to disposable diapers. Philippine authorities considered it an insult and threatened to go to war over the dispute and gave Canadian officials a May 15th deadline to repatriate the trash. Canada has agreed to take back 69 containers, some 1,500 metric tons of rotting garbage back to its shores, ending the diplomatic row over trash between the two countries. So where's all this plastic, all this garbage going? Well, just over 2,000 kilometers east of the Philippines is the Mariana Trench, the deepest known point in the world. It is so deep that very few humans have ever been to the bottom. That was until last month when a diving team of explorers ventured 35,850 feet in a specially equipped submersible craft to touch this lowest point on Earth. What they found at the bottom of the world left a lot of people stunned. You guessed it, plastic trash. One of those deep-sea explorers, Victor Vescovo, is my next guest. He's a Texas businessman, investor, and co-founder of Insight Equity Holdings. He was a naval officer before trying his hand in business, but these days, he prefers the well-deserved title Undersea Explorer. He joins us via remote from Dallas, Texas. Thank you for joining us, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay, you've been to the top of the mountains and you've also been to the bottom of the ocean, but let me go to the Mariana Trench, which is the deepest. What did you see down there?
Well, it was a beautiful place. It was quite pristine, or it looked that way. But unfortunately, I did see one piece of man-made contamination. We're still not completely sure what it was, but it could definitely have been plastic. It had printed material on it, unfortunately.
When you went down there, were you unable in your vehicle to collect anything? Is it just an observation?
Yeah, we're designed to collect rock samples and things of that nature, not something so fragile as something like a small piece of plastic. But I think the real danger that our scientists on our team discussed was the fact that most of the contamination that's down there we can't even see. It's microplastics. And it is now believed that most plastic that ends up in the ocean actually degenerates into a very small piece of plastic that we can't see, that unfortunately are consumed by a lot of marine life.
How long did it take for you to get down there, and how long were you down there?
It took about 4 hours to go from the surface to the bottom of the ocean, and I actually spent the most time anyone's ever spent down there, about 4 hours, trying to survey as much of the bottom as I could, and then another 4 hours to get back up. So a 12-hour mission. Was
it what you expected?
It was even more peaceful than I expected. It's a very deep place. No one really goes there, and completely dark most of the time. But I did see life. One of the first things I saw in the first 10 or 15 minutes was something called a holothurian, or a sea pig, that was completely translucent. And at first I thought it was a carcass of an animal, but it was gently undulating on the bottom of the surface. And so here we have these life forms that are on the bottom of the ocean, surviving somehow in 16,000 pounds per square inch of pressure, near freezing cold, and yet they're thriving. And unfortunately, they're accompanied by some of the waste that we're creating here on land.
Did you see any new life in any form that we don't see, higher up in the water in the oceans?
We're not sure. The organism that I saw, we're still trying to figure out exactly what it was and if it's genetically different enough to constitute a new species. We believe that we did, but there's also a lot of microorganisms that we can't see with the naked eye. So we take samples, and we're going to be spending years probably analyzing the data to figure out exactly what we found.
How did you find, or how did you build this vehicle that you used to get down to the bottom?
Well, it took about 3 years, and we tried to learn on the lessons of those that have gone before us, like all good scientists or explorers do. In 1960, the Trieste went down, and then in 2012, James Cameron went down with his vessel. So we attempted to build kind of a third-generation submersible that has a two-person titanium sphere, which has never really been built for full ocean depth like this before, and we were able to make it very compact. And so over all this time, we've been able to perfect the design. We tested it significantly in many different oceans, and then we were ready to take it down. And we were very fortunate. We were able to dive 5 times to the bottom of the ocean in just 10 days, where it had only been dived twice in the last 59 years.
Do you feel anything physical going down that deep? I realized that the vehicle was designed to make it as easy as possible for you, but could you tell any difference?
No, actually, because the titanium is so strong and so thick, it was able to stay at 1 atmosphere, just like up here on the surface, the entire dive. It got a little bit cold because the ocean deep down that far gets just above freezing, and over time the capsule cools down to the temperature of the water. So you have to wear a hat, gloves, and a thick sweater, but other than that, it's not that bad.
If something catastrophic had happened, how long could you have stayed down there in that vehicle waiting to be rescued?
Well, it depends on just how catastrophic. If there was some kind of structural failure, I probably wouldn't even know it, and I wouldn't be coming back up. But the capsule has life support to sustain 1 person for 9 days and 2 people for 4 days. But when you're down that deep, no one's really going to come and get you.
Is there any way, didn't you want to sort of scoop up the bottom of the trench and bring that back?
Yes, we actually have 3 robotic landers that go down with the submersible that act as navigation beacons on the bottom of the ocean. But they also have the ability to take back soil samples and water samples and even marine biological samples. And so those come up after me. And so we were able to take those samples, and that's what we're going to be analyzing for quite some time.
But no results yet no early analysis of what those samples showed?
No, not quite yet. Scientists are very careful in how they analyze their samples and then, eventually publish their results that are peer-reviewed. We're trying to do this right.
All right, you've been to the top of mountains. The highest mountains in the world. You've been now down to the bottom of the ocean more than once. Which is more fascinating, or which is more of a surprise?
They're both so different. They both have their own surprises. Climbing Mount Everest, for example, is extremely cold and very loud and quite a punishing experience physically. And so that was a bit of a personal exploration of just surviving that. Going to the ocean was much more peaceful, much more psychological, knowing that there's so much pressure outside that capsule and looking for things and being in places that no human being has ever visited, places that have never seen light. And so in a way, that was true exploration and very, very exciting.
Thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
In October 2018, President Trump signed into law the Save Our Seas Act, raising the level of U.S. awareness and action regarding plastics in the oceans. Before President Trump signed the bill, I spoke to a co-sponsor, Dan Sullivan, a Republican United States Senator from Alaska, about the new law's impact.
What we thought we needed to do was provide significant funding to NOAA for cleanup throughout the whole country, for states to actually declare ocean debris emergencies. So for example, when you had the big crisis in Japan, the Fukushima accident there with the tsunami, a lot of what happened in terms of ocean debris washed up on Alaska's shores. Alaska, as you know, is a big state. We have more coastline than the rest of the lower 48 states combined. So a lot of the pollution that comes from Asia ends up on Alaska's shores, but it ends up everywhere. So NOAA would be fully funded to do cleanup. But very importantly, our bill also calls for an international agreement approach to get other countries, particularly in Asia, where the vast majority of the ocean debris comes from, to do more to clean up their ocean pollution that's often pushed into the ocean, comes on America's shores. I've talked to Secretary Pompeo about this. There's a big movement internationally, and America needs to be leading that.
All right. This is to clean up. Is there anything in the bill to sort of head it off at the pass so that we aren't dumping more stuff in it? Because I imagine that the industry that makes plastic,
yes,
they wouldn't like something like that particularly. But what are we doing to sort of head it off at the pass so that it stops being a problem?
Well, look, you're asking the exact right question, and this is a lot of this is to focus on the cleanup portion. But as I mentioned, the bill calls for, and we've been working with the Trump administration on this, for an agreement with other countries, particularly countries in Asia, China, the Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia. These are countries that account for the vast, vast majority of ocean pollution.
The plastic pollution crisis spans all 4 corners of the globe, with countries from 5 of the world's 7 continents making the top 10 lists of global polluters. China comes in as the world's biggest producer of plastic waste, followed by the United States, Germany, Brazil, and Japan, generating almost 120 billion metric tons of plastic each year. about 80% of that plastic waste ends up in our oceans. Results from a 2018 study suggest that up to 95% of plastic in the world's oceans travel through one of 10 rivers: the Yangtze, the Indus, the Yellow River, the Hai River, the Nile, the Ganges, the Pearl River, the Amur River, the Niger, and the Mekong. According to Greenpeace, the 4 main sources of plastic in the ocean are fishing gear, industrial materials, microplastics found in consumer products such as cosmetics and toothpaste, and garbage. To talk about the global threat from all the garbage and all the plastic the world produces and what the United States is doing about it, we are joined by VOA Science and Environment correspondent Steve Baragona. Steve, when you listen to Victor Vescovo talk about the bottom of the ocean, more than 36,000 feet, how beautiful it is and what an exciting adventure, and then you hear there's a plastic bag down there, or what appears to be. What's happening in the oceans?
Yeah, the whole planet basically at this point. When the archaeologists dig up our remains millions of years from now, there will be one solid layer of plastic all around the planet, and that'll be all that's left of us.
What is the United States doing, or what are some of the other nations doing?
Well, in the U.S., there are some efforts to get to the bottom of this. There are some corporate programs to try to produce some different kinds of plastic. One of the big problems with plastic is certain plastics are very hard to recycle. When you make a plastic bottle, you've got the plastic, you've got a dye, you've got maybe something to make the plastic more rigid, and it's hard to separate all those things. So you need to have some kind of monomer, the base molecule that can separate out from all those things cleanly. Because right now what happens is you basically just shred it all up and you've got little bits of all these different things mixed in, and it doesn't make a good product to start with. If you're going to make a new plastic bottle, you want to have a pure material, and you can't do that right now. But there are some new breakthroughs where they're discovering molecules that you can actually separate out the individual molecule, and you can basically start from scratch. This is all at the lab stage right now, so it's not like you're going to find it in your Coke bottle on Monday, but it's coming.
Well, the level of the crisis is rather catastrophic. We have the garbage patch in the Pacific that we've covered here on this show. And then you read about microplastics, about fish eating microplastics, and then the fish eating. You think, in the state of Illinois, the middle of the country, you think you don't have to worry about problems like that. But when you get your fish from one of the coasts, you might be getting microplastics in your meal, if indeed that's happening.
Yeah, there's basically everything that we produce that's made of plastic just breaks down into smaller bits of plastic. It doesn't really degrade the way that a paper bag or something does. The planet hasn't really figured out a way to fully recycle these things yet, and neither have we.
Well, China's the biggest producer, but the United States is right there producing lots of plastic. And Americans, and I admit I use plastic myself, Americans seem likewise addicted to plastic. And you see all over the world people addicted to plastic, even drinking bottles of water.
Yeah, I mean, one of the differences is in this country we do have okay recycling systems, not great recycling systems, and people still don't use them terribly well. But in a lot of parts of the world, there aren't even systems in place where you could recycle your bottles if you wanted to. I mean, in a lot of countries, they don't have garbage men. You take your garbage and you take it out back and you burn it, and that's how you get rid of your trash. So one of the efforts that's underway on a lot of different levels is to try to develop these systems to remove the trash, remove the recycling, and just start from that kind of baseline of having the opportunity to recycle these things in the first place.
Well, you see the fight between the Philippines and Canada over garbage.
Yeah.
And there's something else. All right, there's plastic, there's garbage. Are we doing enough about garbage in the oceans as well, which is a little different than plastic, although plastic is garbage?
I mean, it's no. The short answer is no. I mean, it's all, you can go to places like in Baltimore, and there are some interesting attempts to raise awareness while you're also collecting the garbage. There's, I think it's called Ms. Trashman. It's like this big machine that basically scoops plastic bottles and trash and everything out of the waterway, and it's become sort of a tourist attraction.
Well, when I was growing up, we had glass bottles, and you brought a bottle back and you got 2 cents. Maybe we need to go back, at least to that point, is to have some sort of, you recycle and you get some money for it, because we might see more people recycling. Yeah. Anyway, Steve, thank you.
Sure.
For many reasons, the world has a love-hate relationship with plastic. One, it's convenient and cheap, but it's also very problematic because plastic, which is a byproduct of oil, degrades very, very slowly. Finding environmentally safe alternatives is a big challenge, but a London startup is hoping to change that with a little help from lobsters. VOA's Marcus Meyer-Gallen reports.
We use it all the time, plastic packaging for pills, plants and groceries. But these products are special, because instead of polluting the seas, they come from the sea. Lobster shells are the main ingredient for this alternative to conventional plastic. A London-based startup called The Shellworks wants to replace unsustainable materials with environmentally friendly ones. The startup sees potential in seafood waste.
We identified within that actually seafood waste is something that's not being looked at, but within crustacean shells there's a really valuable biopolymer called chitin. So we sought to kind of extract this chitin from the shells and see whether we could find an alternative to single-use plastics.
To do this, the team crushes the lobster shells and extracts the chitin. Adding a little bit of household vinegar forms a dense liquid, which can then be shaped into the desired form, like a plastic bag.
It's antifungal and antibacterial, which means that it would be really interesting for storing foods. And at the end of life, it's actually a non-polluting fertilizer. So even if you had a bag at home, you could just chop it up, throw it into your plant pots, and it would just help them grow.
That would mean less plastic polluting the environment. But is this alternative viable on a large scale? The Shellwork team says yes. At least in cities, lobster shells are readily available as food waste from big restaurants.
We've been trying to understand how we could scale this, and we reached out to one lobster chain within London. And what we found is they actually have 375 tons of lobsters going to waste every year, which means chitin content-wise, that's 125,000 kilograms. And from that, every year, we could make about 7.5 million plastic bags.
Lobster shells alone won't be able to replace the plastic we use every day, but they could be a piece of the puzzle of creating a more sustainable product cycle. Marcus Meyer-Gallen for VOA News, Washington.
A popular social media blogger says it's going to take more than government policy and international agreements to solve the world's plastic problem. Bea Johnson says it's up to each and every one of us. She's the best-selling author of Zero Waste Home, which has been published in 25 languages, and she's been asked to speak in more than 65 countries and has more than 350,000 followers on social media. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, what is a zero waste philosophy? What is that?
Well, zero waste in the home aims at, of course, trying to eliminate as much trash from your life. What it does, though, is that it actually translates into a simpler life, a life that's based on experiences instead of things.
What made you adopt a zero waste home?
Well, back in 2006, we were living in the suburbs of San Francisco, but had to drive to go to the grocery store, restaurants, schools. And we decided to relocate to be closer to a town so we could have amenities within walking or biking distance. But before finding the right house, we rented an apartment for 1 year and only moved in with the necessities. And that's when we discovered the advantages of a simple life. And then that led us to also read books and watch documentaries on environmental issues, which made my husband and I sad thinking about the future that we as parents were creating for them. And that's what gave us the motivation to change. We watched our energy consumption, our water consumption, and then eventually I started questioning our trash. And in trying to find ways to reduce it, one day I found the term zero waste, which back then was a term that was used in the manufacturing world, and a term also used to describe waste management practices at a municipal level. It was not a term used to describe something you do at home. But seeing that term gave me a goal.
Is it difficult? I mean, a lot of people have a hard time going from being meat eater to vegetarian and then to vegan. How difficult was it for you and your family, because you have children too, to have to go from probably a more complicated lifestyle with more things, more stuff, to this zero waste home?
Yeah, when we started, there were no books, no blogs, no guide on how to eliminate trash at home. So we had to test a lot of things. We tested a lot of extremes, and I also had to pick up the phone and call my mom, my grandma, and my mother-in-law and ask them, like, how the heck did you guys do it before this consumerist society? But over time, we found alternatives that were simple, alternatives that we could see ourselves sticking to in the long run, and that's when zero waste became a lifestyle.
You know, in reading about you, I've even found that you don't have that many clothes, but you seem to be able to take a small amount of clothes and make 50 outfits out of them.
Yes, I own 15 pieces of clothing, and I'm a fashion student, or I'm a fashion graduate, and you'd think that in order to be fashionable, you have to have a lot of clothes, and the more clothes you have, the more options you have, but I found that it's not the case. My 15 pieces of clothing indeed allow me to create more than 50 looks. I've simply chosen items that are super multifunctional, and that can take me from basically a TV set to the country for a hike, to a wedding, from Alaska to Guadeloupe, lots of different types of climates and activities.
All right, if you go to the grocery store and you get, for instance, you get corn, then you get potatoes, and you're going to get, maybe you'll get some meat depending on what you eat, maybe something. You've got packaging. What do you do with them?
We don't.
Okay, explain that, because I think that's the issue, because almost it seems like what people buy for the most part has packaging. And what do you do with the packaging if you're going to be a zero waste home? I guess you don't buy anything that has packaging to start with.
Exactly. So in order to get to very little trash, on a yearly basis for our family, and this is what we produce for our family of 4 in a year, we follow my 5 rules in order. And the first one is to refuse the things that we do not need. The second is to reduce what we do actually need. That means living simply. But the third rule is to reuse, and that means swapping disposables for reusables, including going grocery shopping with a kit of reusables. So we've been living this way for more than a decade, and now we would never think of going to the grocery store without a kit of reusables. So what we take with us to the store are totes, cloth bags for anything dry, like flour, salt, sugar, cereal. We bring also glass jars for anything wet, like meat, fish, deli, cheese, peanut butter, olive oil. And we also buy bread using a pillowcase, and we buy eggs from the farmer's market, where you can also buy them loose. We have, basically, we're taking advantage of the things that are available, that are sold unpackaged in our town. I've actually created a bulk finder. It's a web-based app on my blog, zerowastehome.com, that has allowed for the global zero waste community to share all the bulk locations that they discover throughout the world. So we have 46,000 locations that have been entered in 160 countries. So if you want to buy also your food without packaging and you don't know where to start, you can just check the app.
All right, we only have 20 seconds left. Do you see other people catching on to your zero waste home movement?
Well, people already have. What we have done in our home has initiated a global movement. There are thousands and thousands of people doing this throughout the world, and some of them have even been inspired to open unpackaged stores. Others launch lines of reusables, but also with this movement growing rapidly, it's attracted the attention of very large corporations who are now also offering products in reusables, so it's a huge win.
Bea Johnson, thank you very much. She's the author of Zero Waste Home. Thank you, Bea. Before we go, an update on the ongoing protests in Sudan, and it's not good. Sudan's pro-democracy protesters, in their bid to push the country's transitional military council to step aside and make way for a civilian-led government, are still pressing on with their campaign of civil disobedience. Protesters have now begun organized labor strikes, which have shuttered businesses in the Sudanese capital city of Khartoum and other cities in the country. In response, Sudan's military council is using brute force against the protesters. The military council has been in control of Sudan since former dictator Omar al-Bashir was ousted in April. The latest attacks on protesters by the military council have again resulted in death. Reports say more than 100 protesters so far have been killed, 500 injured by the ruling military council. The African Union has suspended Sudan from all activities over this deadly military crackdown on protesters, stating that the suspension would last until Sudan's military hands over power to a transitional civilian authority. Of course, we're going to keep you posted as new information arises. That's all the time we have for today. Stay plugged in by liking us on Facebook at Voice America. You can also like my Facebook page at facebook.com/Greta. And do follow me on Twitter at Greta. Thank you for being plugged in.
Thank you.